fast as it started, it is now almost over. Our recap for The Boys Season 4 continues with Season 2, Episode 6, entitled Dirty Business. And Dirty Business, indeed it is. We get a lot of revelations. We get a lot of story developments. We get a lot of twists, even more of the comedy. Eli, do you have anything to say before we get this started? You muted yourself. Yes. Well, all of that and more on today's episode.
My bad.
Yeah. All of this and more on today's episode of The Boys Season 4 recap. Stay tuned.
You do.
All right, Eli, Season 4, Episode 6, entitled Dirty Business. This is a wild and crazy episode, but it's a surprisingly forward-moving trajectory. It's another what I call bottle episode, where pretty much all the characters are together in one setting, with the exception of 2. So we're kind of just going to roll through it, and then we're going to see where it goes, because this is also one of those episodes that I kind of like with shows like these, because it shows every one of these characters gets their asses handed to them in some way or another. Like, every single one of them comes out worse for the wear ultimately after this. I mean, your thoughts going into this after last week, and followed by your thoughts coming out of it, like,
oh my gosh, coming into it, I don't know what to expect. I mean, I thought last episode was going to be pretty tough to top, and I think they topped it in terms of shock value, definitely, which already was pretty crazy given some of the events that happened last week. But overall, I think it still progressed the story really well. And I think you're right. I think every single character pretty much had a pretty low moment in terms of looking to achieve their goals for what they each individual. Sorry, I can't talk right now. Each one individually is set out to do. And I think that just we see a lot of really traumatizing things, to say the least, and I'm all for it in terms of the brutal things that we see. But I honestly wasn't sure what to expect. I wasn't sure where they were going to take the story after last episode, but now I see we're fully locked in with the Homelander basically trying to have a superhero coup basically and take over the world, and I'm very excited to see how this progresses.
yeah, it's going to be interesting to say the least, especially given those of us who know where this goes in the comics. Some big things happen with Butcher this episode too. Like, there's a big twist at the end that, as I've said this to many people throughout the day so far today, I am actually mad that I did not see that twist coming. I'm actually quite angry with myself, especially because it's literally the same kind of a twist that they use in another favorite show of mine. We'll be getting to that in a bit. So I guess we should talk about, like, the central foundation of this episode. There's like a couple things that really set this up, but the big centerpiece is Tek Knight's essentially the equivalent of the Republican committee meeting in order to determine who they're going to run for the president in Succession Season 3. Remember that episode? And it feels like The Boys is basically doing their own version of that, only, the Boys it's basically like another recon mission in order to, like, try and, take out Newman again. It's kind of beating a dead horse. Like, you can really feel, like, the negative spirit on the Boys right now. They're struggling. They just had loss after loss, and it's really kicking their ass. Butcher's on the team. He's out on the team. It's like he's there every other episode. And Butcher's, of course, off on his own with Samir, as revealed to be Newman's. I don't even know what to call him. Her baby daddy, essentially. That's kind of the term that I use for him. Yeah. So we got a lot of stuff. And so once again, this is another classic case of the Boys having a mission that goes horribly wrong and off the rails. So let's just start there. Let's just start there. I mean, setting up for it, so it's another Gen V insert, first of all, Tek Knight, following up after his reintroduction into the series last episode. So what'd you think of that, first off?
I was excited to see him. I knew we were going to see him in a couple episodes this season, and obviously, having watched Gen V, I think they took him in a direction I wasn't quite expecting, in terms of making him just a sadistic sexual predator. But I think it was very fun. I liked how his entire family lineage is just they were all slave catchers, and he's
And they're just
explaining
openly
to
bragging
A-Train.
about it.
He's just like staring A-Train directly in the eyes
Yeah.
as he's like telling people. I found that amazing.
See, these are moments in the show now that I'm like, really, this is where we're at now with the show. Like,
I mean, yeah, obviously they're taking all these tropes you see with like the main superheroes and just like they're flipping so many elements of their backstory to just make them so like fucked up. And I'm for it personally. Like Batman is probably my favorite superhero. If like we're talking about like just actual superheroes, and I honestly was dying laughing for a good portion of this episode just with it, and that a lot of that came from how they portrayed Tek Knight.
right.
And just his antics that he gets up to. It was very funny.
Well, so I basically want to break down each of the characters that's really effective. Because I would say that ironically, there's really only kind of two characters that sort of come out of this unscathed, and that's Starlight and Kimiko. But even still, those two even suffer a little bit of a defeat when Starlight knocks out Firecracker in quite a funny scene, and then Kimiko, basically continues to try and go and see Frenchie, who turned himself into jail last episode and has not been able to see him since. So in terms of that, for them to just write Frenchie out of the show, I gotta say, kind of disappointed, but whatever. It's kind of what I've come to expect from the show now. So let's go down by you want to start with the boys, you want to start with the supes?
Oh boy, that's a good question. If we can just touch on Kamiko real quick. I actually typically Kamiko is never really in the spotlight for these kinds of episodes, but I really like the performance that she gave in this episode. Obviously, she doesn't have a lot to work with, right? Like she can't talk, there's only so much she can do in given situations, but it's like that scene with her and A-Train, like when she's like using books to communicate with him, I thought
Great
was
scene.
pretty
Great scene.
I
Like
thought I
she's
thought
learned
that
to
was
think on her
great.
feet,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Like it shows like how smart she really is, and it makes sense that in that scenario that's something she would do, and kind of especially at the end when obviously Frenchie. I know everyone kind of has their criticisms about the way they've taken Frenchie's character in this season, but I think that this whole situation with him being in prison has definitely affected Kamiko in a way where we're really like exploring how lonely she really is. And I thought I was a little bit emotional when I saw her trying to go in and visit him at the end of the episode,
Yeah.
and when she's like, "I have nowhere else to go," like, damn, that kind of hit actually.
The first bit of emotion that I've actually been feeling for that character. Like this episode, I don't want to twist it. This episode was very good, and it made me come around on a lot of the emotional beats of the characters a lot. It kind of reminded us like why we love a majority of these characters, the good and the bad ultimately, why we should really hate some of the newer characters ultimately that they insert. Let's talk about Marvin. I want to talk about Mother's Milk for a second before we get into A-Train, who I just realized is the only other character that kind of comes out of this unscathed. Mother's Milk, panic attacks, but in the form of heart attacks. I mean, he gets one awesome win in. Like Mother's Milk has kind of been up and down throughout the seasons. They can't seem to make up their mind whether they want him to be awesome or whether they want him to be a laughing stock. And so they kind of bounce back and forth. And it's ultimately really a matter of like which one he'll be in the current moment. And in this instance, they kind of decided to do both in a weird way. But also be like, oh, no, he actually is suffering physically from this role. Like, it's unfortunately Butcher's kind of proven right in the sense of he's not cut out for this. He's not. And then, like, the level of espionage that they are and the new threat level that they're up against from the Supes in the 7, it's kind of sad that they're, like, choosing to take this route with this character ultimately. Somebody who was previously, like, a beacon of strength ultimately. And now, like,
yeah, I think it makes sense personally. I don't know. I think I know a couple people online have been talking about how they predict A-Train to die at the end of this season with his character arc and everything. But I think Mother's Milk will play kind of a interesting part in how A-Train's character arc goes these next 2 episodes, and I'm curious to see what he's going to do. Like obviously, I assume he's going to like try and just be out altogether. But now that Sage knows who he is, right? And obviously he shot her in the head, but like as she mentioned when she had that interesting scene with the Deep, that her brain tissue can regenerate itself, so she will eventually be back to her normal self, and now she knows his face and she knows so I almost wonder like if someone's gonna track him down.
Well, it's not like that's the first time that she's seen him though, because remember she saw him back at the convention in episode 2 when she was recruiting Firecracker. So she knows what he looks like. That's not like disputed. It's just a matter of like, okay, the effect that it has on him, and the fact that honestly, like I wasn't sure that he was going to pull the trigger for a second, and the fact that he did, I was like, okay, like that's pretty cool ultimately, and the fact that it delayed them obviously from being able to save Huey ultimately. So, yeah,
But
I just
touching on Mother's Milk more, I really like the dynamic between him and A-Train this season. I think it makes perfect sense that Mother's Milk is the one to recruit A-Train because he, like, you know, you go back to him at season 1, he was always like he was working at a, you know, one of the like a youth prison basically, like trying to get the best out of people. He's always like had such a uplifting spirit when it comes to like he's a natural leader, right? And for the right reasons, but we can see how much of a toll this has had on him, right? We see him like walking around with his like meditation app or whatever. Like he's been really trying to you know do what is right ultimately. But I think that this has had too much of an effect on him, and I you know it really spells doom for I think the rest of the boys, which without Butcher are kind of
yeah,
lacking a clear leader. So I almost
yeah.
wonder if Huey is going to step into that role in the coming episodes.
It would be interesting, but given the direction that they've taken with Huey, I am less
Right,
confident in that than when this
right.
season started, I would say.
Yeah, especially how Huey ended the episode. Like
Yeah,
he's in a
exactly.
very vulnerable state. So
Yeah, well, Huey starts and ends this episode with like a shell, and the whole thing is that like in a way this episode is kind of therapeutic. It just sucks that like you know he had to go through what he went through in this episode in order to
yeah,
see
well,
the other side clearly. But real quick, I want to talk about A-Train for a second and like
yeah,
that end moment because I think that end moment was crucially important in terms of wherever the hell they're taking him with his relationship with Mother's Milk. You know, first of all, the fact that they managed to convince him to save MM, and also the fact that he does it in front of a witness who he knows like was not paid off. So he's like, okay, wow, this is finally my moment. There is
yeah,
hope for me because I feel like up until this point it was pretty much just MM's word, and he had like no proof, and he was kind of just starting to get scared. You know, we know what happens when A-Train finds himself in a corner. You know, he tends
right,
to lash out, and in this case, that would not have been good for him. But the fact that he finally had a chance to prove himself in that sense, it's kind of uplifting. So that's why I say he's the third character who kind of emerged unscathed from this episode.
right.
Now let's talk about Huey. Oh man, poor
Oh my
Huey.
boy,
Poor
look at how they
Huey.
massacred my boy.
Look at how they massacred my boy. There have been no better words. First of all, the Spider-Man ripoff bit, which I don't know if that was an inside joke. Here's the thing, right? So if you remember, there was a little movie that came out this past summer called Across the Spider-Verse, right?
Yep,
And you
great
remember,
movie.
right? Fantastic movie. Made a lot of people's top tens that year. You remember in that movie, the Peter Parker from Gwen Stacy's universe that became the Lizard and died. Take a guess who voiced that Peter Parker?
Oh no way.
Jack Quaid. Jack
No
Quaid.
way.
Yep, Huey himself. So, with that being said, yeah, was that an inside joke? I'm not sure in terms of having him replace Webweaver, who needs one of those like amphetamines. Who knows what kind of drugs those are that he needs shoved up his butt, and MM accidentally stabs him in his web hole. Like the boys, they can't help themselves at this point. They need
Oh,
to have
I
the
just
ridiculous.
thought that having him have a web hole, like how they like just disgustingly subvert so many of these superheroes. It's just so like you love to hate it. You know, just it's like who thinks of this? Like to actually have it come out of the back of him instead of
Yeah.
his wrist.
I don't know if this is Kripke or if Garth Ennis is consulting on this, but whatever the case is, that's not
Oh,
even the most disgusting thing that happens in this episode.
oh, not even close. And that's
Yeah.
the worst part.
Huey, who takes Webweaver's position in order to, because he basically gets an invite from Tek Knight to be his new sidekick, which basically fulfills all of the, you know, worst sidekick nightmares. The fact that, you know, your superhero mentor is actually a sadomasochist who wants to partner up with Ashley of all people in terms of sexually domineering sex slaves. I'm like, so this is why I never watched 50
So-
Shades of Grey.
Oh, and the worst part was I knew kind of what was coming. I just didn't expect it to be as bad as it was.
Yeah.
The moment that Huey first began talking with Tek Knight, I just knew that it was going to be some gay sex stuff.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh. I mean, yeah, we're about to.
Yeah, it was, yeah. So basically, like, he's strapped to a table and everything. He's pretending to go along with it. It shows how effed up Tek Knight is because the fact that he doesn't figure it out sooner is kind of hilarious. And the fact that it's like, yeah, he's put this whole thing together and ultimately this is what he does in his spare time. And the irony being that he has a black butler too, which we'll get to how that wraps up perfectly near the end.
Oh my gosh. I love the idea of the Batcave just being a creepy sex dungeon. It's so funny to me.
It's like the other side. It's like I feel like in this sense, Black Noir is now closer to Daredevil in that sense, and Tek Knight is the Bruce Wayne / Batman. It's kind of funny how like how they continue to like incorporate new elements of parody into superheroes ultimately. So unfortunately, despite them managing to save Huey and kill Tek Knight in a rather hilarious way, yeah, Huey's really traumatized after this. And I would be too if he had gone through that. He literally says, he's like, yeah, Ashley's cum juice was just rubbed all over my face. And I'm
That
like,
was out of pocket.
yeah, that's wow. The Boys has been crazy before, but like, Jesus, talk
Yeah,
about like,
they're pushing limits this season.
yeah,
Holy cow.
this episode, they're pushing limits.
Yeah, I mean, between that and the human centipede scene,
Yeah,
I just don't know how they
they're
can
just
like
unleashing
keep.
their inner freak. That's what they're doing.
No, they really are. I mean,
Yeah,
someone has to sit down and think of this and then suggest it to other people.
yeah,
Then they have to like, you know, figure out a plan to like film the scene, then actually do it. And it's
yeah,
just like there's so many people it has to go through that we're just like, okay, yeah, let's do it.
yeah,
It's just I love I love it. I love it, but also hate it
yeah.
because my eyes. I don't think I'm not gonna forget that for a long time, which
I
is
don't
maybe what
blame
they're
you.
relying on.
I don't blame you. All right, so moving on from that, obviously, well, actually, one last scene, between him and Starlight when they're sitting there, and Huey's like, "Yeah, I miss my dad," ultimately, and it's just like kind of this like getting this weight off his chest, and I'm like, "Oh no, is Huey permanently broken? Like, is this kind of Huey's point of no return? Is this Huey's like Becca moment?" I mean, he technically already had that with Robin, but it's like Huey has had so many ups and downs throughout this series, ultimately, from like ending at rock bottom after joining a righteous cause and being in constant danger in season 1 to finally starting to take a stand, but getting his ass beat back in season 2 to, actually like going on a little bit of Butcher's craze in season 3. And out of this, where he's just suffered loss after loss after loss.
Yeah, you really got to feel
Yeah.
for him.
And the worst part is I don't think he's done. I don't think they're done fucking with him this season yet.
Yeah, I feel like in terms of these last 2 episodes for the season, Huey's character, I feel like they can take in a couple different directions. Whether he's gonna like try and pick himself back up. I mean, obviously we see that him just trying to take on work. I mean, between grieving his dad, it was not the right answer, and kind of his break. I felt like his breakdown was really appropriately timed. I think it was better to delay it for the end of this episode than to just have it at the start of the episode where it
Yeah.
maybe would have obviously lost a little bit of its merit before everything that happened. So,
All right.
and I do like it when writers do that, is when they kind of have characters go through a traumatic moment, but they don't immediately react to it. And then it's usually like something kind of, maybe even something small that can kind of break their shell a little bit. And that's when they fully break down. I really like when they do things like that because it shows they haven't, they're real people. Like they're living with trauma, and it can kind of affect them in different ways.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. Let's move on to the supes now, who, man, even the supes don't go unscathed. Literally, the fact that the only supe that goes unscathed in this episode is A-Train is hilarious. So, Newman first, because, oh man, talk about like an interesting arc. I really think that Newman has got like one of the most interesting arcs this season as far as being set up as the central villain, like kind of beside Homelander, to kind of going back and forth in this pseudo weird alliance with the boys and constantly towing the line between like, okay, like, yeah, like obviously I have a certain angle. I guess the fact that she's the only suit that's not coming at it from like a pro suit domination angle. She really is only in this to protect herself and her daughter. It's kind of the only reason why she even has the compound V. Like she really is a
Right.
much more measured and interesting. I'm not even gonna say antagonist. She's more of an anti-hero ultimately at this point. Like honestly, Butcher, just this season alone, Butcher I feel like has been way worse than her.
Oh, I agree.
Ultimately, the fact that he was able to go to that length and honestly just seeing her at this convention interacting with all of these like actually terrible people. And once again, begging the question of it's like, yeah, are the supes entirely wrong in terms of their want to dominate humankind, Because I mean, don't get me wrong, the
Yeah.
supes are fucked up in their own sense. But the thing that the boys has done, and I think that's honestly caused them a lot of criticism, but it's the thing that they've done since the beginning, is questioning the moral scruples of humanity in the sense of constantly reminding us that as bad as the supes get, they are ultimately a product of humankind's experimentation.
I mean, that's what I really like about Sister Sage's character, because she obviously has shown to be a very brilliant person.
Are we talking about Sister
individually.
Sage or Newman?
Did I say Sage?
You said Sage. I was talking about Newman.
Oh, okay. My bad. Well, I mean, Newman is a character where you have to pity her in some ways, because this is a life she never wanted, right? I mean, she was kind of just picked up by Stan Edgar and kind of made into what she is to almost help further his goals.
Yes.
We can assume,
Yes.
and you see her going down a similar path with like her daughter, right? She's wanted to protect her daughter, but she basically did the same thing to her that Edgar did, right? And so is she really doing any better than Edgar did before her,
Exactly.
so
And the irony being that, again, despite, finally being free of him last season, she willingly helped set him free after he was set to go back to jail in the last episode. So there's that. And kind of, I think the most telling image of that was when she had the hallucination of the head exploding. But then at the end, ultimately decides to go along with it and basically kind of give this whole pro soup, fuck the normal people. They're just a they're just a workforce. You guys are the top spot because you guys were the smartest ones and figured out how to get there. And I'm like,
stealing the thunder
okay,
from
so
Homelander.
yeah, it's definitely a very smart political move, especially given how hard Homelander drops the ball in that sense. But
Yeah.
like, I mean, what are we thinking here? Because we obviously, again, we know that Singer's onto her and is actively trying to take her down from behind the scenes. But I mean, is there hope for Newman? I guess is my question.
I'd argue is there hope for Singer. let's be real.
Honestly, you're right. Honestly, I'm amazed he's made it this long. As the number one anti-soup character. Like I think he's in a competition with Butcher as far as who's more anti-soup. I'm amazed that he's lasted this long.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, I don't expect him to live through like the beginning of next season. If that, I'm sure we'll get some kind of situation with the White House in the finale. But yeah, Newman, I think, really stepped up in a position where a power vacuum was kind of needed to be filled in that exact moment, right?
Yeah.
Because Homelander is almost, and it kind of shows how much Homelander has been relying on Sage for this entirety of the season. And his plan kind of backfires, and we see that's not going to help his mental state. And obviously,
I was half expecting him to crack, and I actually thought they did that very well. I thought they did that very well in this episode because most of the time, whenever Homelander's about to crack, you're like, "Oh boy, here we go again," kind of.
I know.
But this episode, I thought they did a very, very good job of like showing like it naturally building and like, oh my god, he's like gonna crack ultimately before Newman has to step in and save his ass. So we're gonna merge Sister Sage, Firecracker, and Homelander all into one segment, and then we'll wrap up with Butcher and that twist that ends the episode. So. Kind of what I liked about this is that the kind of the back and forth kind of tete-a-tete tightrope walk battle that Sage and Firecracker are now playing with Homelander ultimately, and who controls who. And as far as the episode ending, like supposedly I was talking with Dustin about this, and supposedly the episode there were previous episodes that hinted at Firecracker the drugs that she was taking in order to like I don't even know how to describe lactate more faster. I don't even know how like what the word is. And ultimately, after Sage is shot in the head by Mother's Milk, which is a seed and resulted in her basically becoming like brain dead again, essentially, which I'm like, okay, for a second, I thought she actually was dead. I'm like, there's no way that she's actually dead, but apparently, yeah. So Sage ultimately becomes down for the count. Homelander almost blows his top. Newman has to step in and save him. Not to mention the fact that like Ryan has officially drank the Kool-Aid right now, right? Like he's officially like he's fully integrated with his dad, and in terms of like his dad conditioning him in the last episode with how he had him, show Adam who is boss ultimately, the PJ Byrne character. So do we have any hope for Ryan, before we talk about, Firecracker and her kind of new chokehold that she has over Homelander?
Oh, I kind of want to just dive straight into that because I find that very interesting.
Okay, you're right.
I think how they handled Firecracker this episode, I don't know.
It's very interesting in terms of how this is the second female character in the show that they've kind of used to control Homelander in the sense. You had Stormfront in season 2, but with Stormfront, what the difference is that she was kind of more of an equal, and if you look at the trajectory of Homelander's arc kind of throughout, and like the main antagonist that he's set up against, because the thing that everybody forgets about season 1 of The Boys, Homelander and Butcher, Homelander doesn't even know about Butcher's existence until the penultimate episode of season 1. So really, Homelander's primary antagonist of the first season is Stillwell, who he then ultimately kills, and then it's really Stan in season 2 before Stormfront comes in. And then season 3, after he removes Stan, he's pretty much unopposed, and it's back to really just focusing on the boys. And this season, it's kind of, in a way, he's surrounded all over the place, but it's more so like the incompetence of everybody around him. And in this instance, kind of Firecracker sees an opportunity and steps in. And she's kind of fulfilling the role that he always wanted from Stillwell, but never got. So that moment has kind of come full circle thematically. And just, the device itself, like, as if the freaking, the dominatrix scene wasn't enough. They're like, we need one more. We need one more stupid moment to really tie this all together. And, oh my God.
Yeah, my jaw hit the floor. Like, I thought, obviously, like, the sex stuff was pretty shocking, but like, once we were in the sex dungeon, I knew some whack shit was gonna happen, and I wasn't terribly surprised by some of the things that did happen. But when she just straight up lactated on him, my jaw hit the floor because of what it meant for their
And
character.
not even like a
dynamic.
subtle thing, just a quick squirt. Just like a
Yeah.
squirt. I'm like, oh, so this really is not giving any
I
fucks
hadn't-
this season.
I hadn't seen his eyes light up in like 2 seasons.
It's been a minute. It's been a minute, honestly.
And just, oh my gosh, I just think like as if this couldn't get any more topsy turvy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ends with her literally breastfeeding him. The thing that he always wanted, just that mommy figure to comfort him that he never got as a child.
Oh, and it really makes you wonder, because obviously we could see like Sage and Firecracker do not get along.
No, not at all.
So,
Sage is immediately regretting her decision to bring in Firecracker.
So, I mean, affecting like how this is going to go into next episode, Homelander's obviously going to be mad at Sage for fumbling the bag. Obviously,
and not to mention the fact that Firecracker comes in and is about to be like lasered by Homelander before Firecracker manages to turn the tide. She's like, yeah. She's like, I got knocked out by Starlight. So even though like she got humiliated, she's like, yeah, that proves me as being innocent. Like I couldn't have been the mole. Yep. And Sage is either stupid. And when they figure out that no doy, Cameron Coleman wasn't the fucking mole, they're like, yeah, either Sage is an idiot and incompetent, or she knew and let them escape. So either way, Sage is kind of done, and the power is kind of transitioned to Firecracker's hands, which it's like kind of priceless how that worked out. The so-called smartest character on the show ensured her own demise. Ultimately, like at this point, I'm like, okay, there's no way that Sage walks out of the season alive.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see what's gonna happen with her. There's just like Sage, Huey, and I don't know, there was someone else I wanted to mention, but probably Newman. I think
Newman. I throw Newman in. As far as main characters go, they finally get rid of Tek Knight though, thankfully, after his butler comes up and strangles him, which was just like so perfect. And he's like,
it was so poetic.
When they finally revealed the ultimate plan, the whole reason why they snuck in this place in the first place, which was it's like, oh yeah, they're gonna create human internment camps, which is like, okay, that's not surprising considering that they hinted that in the first episode, but it's like, okay, so that is the goal ultimately. And the fact that that's what causes the butler to snap and finally turn back to the side of the righteous. He's like, I have sat through so many countless things that this horrible person has done since he was a boy, and now I can sit by no longer. Perfect.
Yeah, just that was amazing. I love how Zendaya was the safe word too. Just why?
Just perfect.
Oh,
just perfect.
No, this episode was full of kind of very similar to last week. I think so many moments that made The Boys what it is for better or for worse. And I think this is a great place to leave it for, it's a little open to interpretation, and at least it leaves me, and I assume you and anyone else who watched it, very, very much guessing where some things are going to go by the finale, and I'm very excited to see what's going to happen.
Yes, indeed. We also do get one quick scene with the Deep and Black Noir where we get the face reveal of the actor who's been playing Black Noir for 4 seasons, Nathan Mitchell, playing a completely different person than the Black Noir who unfortunately had his guts ripped out by Homelander at the end of last season. But, oh man, just once again, great. And I love how the Deep has the audacity to be like, sometimes people laugh at me. And it's like, okay, so he's just in on the joke now. That's what we're going with this. We don't know this. All right, so we got to wrap this up.
He's just so dumb, but just he's trying so hard,
Right. You almost are like impressed by his stupidity, kind of, in terms of just how it blinds him and lets him keep going.
Despite him only having that one scene with the new Noir, we kind of do see his more kind of fucked up philosophy and view on things. It makes sense just because of how relentlessly beat down he's been, and that's really the only way he is going to make himself feel powerful is when he tells Cameron Coleman he's going to fuck his wife even after he kills him. I just it makes sense.
Low-key been getting some wins this season. They're not good in any way, shape, or form, as we know he's always been a terrible person, and especially given that it seemed like for a brief moment he was going to be redeemed after he was so badly humiliated between seasons 1 and 2, but they just would not stop pulling back ultimately.
It feels like as Homelander's plan is coming together, and he's been having a few more wins here and there, it feels like there's less pressure on the Deep, and so it kind of feels like he's really be able to just take on the sidekick role in its fullest, and I'm all for it. It's hilarious.
Yes indeed. And all right, let's wrap this episode up with again the biggest twist, the biggest moment of the episode. It's another Butcher solo episode, similar to episode 3. Similar to episode 3, where you have Butcher and Kessler on their own interrogating Samir, portrayed by Omid Abtahi from American Gods and The Mandalorian. And ultimately, it's okay. So first things first, before we break down the actual reveal itself, what did you think of the way in which the reveal was revealed? Because this is not the first
honestly,
time.
I
Because this
had
is not the first time that we've seen this moment portrayed before. Like, and there's
Right.
been different and various assorted ways in which moments like these story-wise are revealed. So in terms of this,
personally, I saw it coming since like episode 3.
really, you had it
of the
pegged that
season.
early. You're like,
I
this
did.
guy's not there.
It just seemed too convenient because he never was around when any other characters were. Right, I
Right.
feel like Butcher was always
Right.
alone with him. It feels like Butcher would want to introduce someone this important and like of his background to the team at least to see if there was any way they could help or get them to help, vice versa, whoever it might be. And just I thought that there was just a little too much inconsistency there, and it made sense with Becca, him already hallucinating Becca. I'm like, all right,
Right.
who
The
else could he
seeds,
be
it's one
hallucinating?
of those things that where the reason why I say I'm angry that I didn't predict it is because it's one of the few elements in this. Otherwise, again, I'm not going to say disappointing because this episode was enough to show, okay, they do have at least an idea of what they're building towards, even
Yeah,
if the way that they've been getting there has been kind of rocky. Ultimately, like they
yeah,
do have a destination in mind, and it was the fact that okay, they actually did their job. The reason why I feel like some of the other storylines have been suffering this season is because they actually did their job, and they're like, okay, we are layering in the seeds with Butcher. We've given him enough. We know he's
right.
got a ticking clock. What else can we throw at this guy? And we're like, okay, hallucinations now, as is evident. And like I said, the temp V after effects, the 6 months to live now, the attempt to use V to what's it called? The attempt to use V to cure himself, the hallucinations of Becca, and now we know ultimately kind of that Butcher is now this even begs the question even more. Is Billy Butcher even still there, or is he literally just the good angel, Becca, and now the bad angel, Kessler? You know?
Is he just the super tumor?
Exactly, literally the super tumor,
So
even the rabbit with the tumor breaking through its legs last season. Like Butcher is
yep,
literally on his last legs, and they're
yep.
either going to cure him or he's going to die like viciously and painfully. Ultimately, the fact that ultimately,
Yeah.
and also the other big thing is that Jeffrey Dean Morgan reveals he's like, yeah, I killed Ezekiel for you. So that begs an even bigger question. It's like, okay, so is this setting up for Butcher with a fight with the rest of the team, the boys? Which, I mean, if there was ever a time to take them down, I mean, one member hospitalized, one member not able to use their powers, one member emotionally crippled, one member physically assaulted, another member in jail. The boys are literally at their lowest right now. Like, they got that crap kicked out of them this episode.
And Butcher quite literally is at a crossroads between the two voices in his head,
Yes.
and so we're gonna see what path he takes, and I feel like whatever he chooses is gonna obviously determine how the rest of the series goes. But I feel like with everything he's done to get to where he is with developing the virus, can he really even turn back at this point?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Especially once Samir reveals a crucial bit of information that he's like, yeah, the only way that we could create something strong enough to kill Homelander would be
kill every soup.
to kill every soup. And Butcher knows,
Right.
like, fuck, that means me.
It means Ryan.
It means a lot of people that are near and dear to them. Like you said, Kimiko,
Yeah.
Annie. Yeah, there's a lot of people. So that I think
We're
is
really
kind of where
gonna see
right.
a true,
Because we know the soup's end game ultimately. We do know the soup's end game. Now it's a matter of, okay, what are the heroes going to do about it now that they have these options in front of them? That's kind of what it's setting us up for. And like I said, honestly, so we talked about this in the past as far as like certain specific episodes to look out for, right? Previously, it's been penultimate episodes. Recently, Succession's most recent season could pull off a crazy thing, and their third episodes or early on episodes have been crazy. With the boys, I think between season 2, episode 6, which was them breaking Lamplighter out of the facility, which was great. Season 3, episode 6, Hero Gasm, and now this season, episode 6, the best episode of this season so far. I mean, episode 6 is clearly the seasons to look forward to for the boys. I can only imagine what they're going to do for next season, for the final season. So with that being said, Eli, episode 6, Dirty Business, what do you rate this episode out of 5?
Out of 5, I'm gonna give it a 4. Obviously, wasn't perfect, but I think it accomplished what it set out to do. Just didn't wow me, and obviously aside from the shock value scenes. But
Yeah,
I thought overall it was a very good episode. I don't have too much to complain about.
all right, indeed. I give it a 4 as well, ultimately. So before we get out of here, I just wanted to let you guys know that for those of us who are listening to this on podcast form, House of the Dragon recap will be coming in right after this. And if you're all right, people, we're officially at the halfway point, season 2, episode 4, entitled "The Dance of Dragons." We got a big moment, big battle that we were waiting for a while. Really, since the beginning of this season, it was like, when's Rook's rest? When's Rook's rest gonna be? and they showed it in all the trailers, and now we finally got it. Eli, you ready to break this sucker down?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. All of that and more on tonight's episode of Dragon Watch House of the Dragon recap. Stay tuned.
I was following King Viserys' death.
My brother was a slave to his omens and portents. Anything to make his feckless reign appear to have purpose.
What are we going to do about it?
Did you really think that you could just fly about the realm, trying to steal my brother's throne?
Kings can make us kings. Dragons did.
All right, Eli. So we got a lot to cover here. But first things first, before we get into it, like I said, going into this, we knew that this week, after the build-up from last week, was going to be Rook's Rest. We saw Kristen Cole and Gwaine Hightower leading their forces to the other parts of the Crownlands. Daemon has Harrenhal, and obviously how that's going to have repercussions going forward. But what I love, first and foremost, what I love about this episode is I love that, it gives so much extra context. Because like I said, the book that this is based on, Fire and Blood, only gave us the battles. But now we have the moments that lead to the battles. Again, specific moments from the battles as far as how they go that then turn out to be completely different. Because I will say that when we get to Rook's Rest, there's a certain sequence that I thought went one way that went completely the opposite. And honestly, it ended up having me laughing a lot more during the battle than I thought was going to happen. But I guess we can start by saying this was basically the dunk on Aemon episode. People are, sorry, not Aemon, did it already. How many times can we screw up the Targaryen names this episode? This is literally the dunk on Aegon episode, where it felt like literally everybody was just like, yeah, you're useless, you're not shit, and kind of just stay out of everybody's way. And then,
it's him against the world.
Him against the world. And then he doesn't listen to his better judgment. He finally takes his dragon Sunfire out, thinking like, oh yeah, I'll definitely be able to contribute, do something actually useful, prove myself king. And well, we see that is not the case at all. At all. We also got our first major main character death this episode. Unfortunately, like I said, we're getting spoilers right out of the way. R.I.P. to the Princess Rhaenys Targaryen. Like I said, unfortunately, for those of us who'd read the book and knew what sequence we were coming up against, we knew that after a certain point, yeah, it wasn't, she wasn't unfortunately going to last long for this world, especially, once you see the repercussion that this has on the rest of the world. Like I said, the first couple episodes of this season were building up, this back and forth tete-a-tete, each side trying to get one in over the other, and now it's full-on war. We got the dragons. Eli, your general thoughts on the episode before we break down each specific moment.
Oh, honestly, it was everything I hoped for and then some. I was so happy with how the battle was actually executed and seeing all the different point of views from just the people on the ground and the absolute carnage that we ended up seeing, and the dragon riders in the sky. It was an absolute fan fest, or full of fan service, I should say. That's
yes.
It was fantastic.
It was really, really good. And we're going to get to that. Obviously, that ends the battle. There's a short episode this week, thankfully, only an hour long. These episodes, we know they are juggernauts when it comes to their lengths. But like I said, the big one is the buildups, So like I said, the inciting incident, Daemon has Harrenhal. He's continuing to be haunted by visions. This time he sees, in addition to young Rhaenyra, he also sees who he actually beheads for a second. We believe we see a back shot of Viserys before he actually meets with Alice Rivers and talks with her. And she's like basically telling him, yeah, I'm a witch, basically. What about it? There's nothing about it you can do. But she has Daemon drink this weird stuff that then causes him to black out. And then he wakes up again at the actual meeting with Lord Blackwood, who, if I'm not mistaken, that's the same Lord Blackwood that, what's it called? That's the same Lord Blackwood that attempted to proposition Rhaenyra when they were children back in season 1. So I thought that was an interesting bit of fan service there. But what's interesting, too, is we also get another insert from one of the main houses, Lord, Oscar Tully, who is the ancestor of Catelyn Tully, along with her sister and brother, Lysa and Edmure. So Daemon obviously is not happy with the Tully's work. So instead, he ends up attempting to commission House Blackwood. House Blackwood is basically being like, yeah, help us take out House Bracken, who we hate. And then, but also it's like we bent the knee to Viserys. We believe in oaths, and Daemon, for whatever reason, is just not buying it. So he's like, yeah, assemble the forces in front of my dragon, and then we'll see how loyal you guys really are. So what do you think about where Daemon's at ultimately? In his little quest at Harrenhal.
I feel like we didn't really get a whole lot of new context this week as we kind of did last week. We're kind of just seeing him more with his internal struggle, right? I think the the visions that Allison is it Allison?
Alice Rivers.
I think it's Alice. Yeah, okay. Alice Rivers is giving him through, which I thought was really cool. Side note that I didn't really talk about in the last episode, but there are weirwood roots and like weirwood trees in the walls of Harrenhal, which for the lore fans of Game of Thrones, they like that's where she's kind of that's why her magic is so strong, is because of the weirwood trees and the roots that are kind of spread throughout the castle. But I think that those visions did a really good job where we kind of see like seems like almost Damon doesn't even know whether he's doing this for himself or for Rhaenyra, right?
Right.
Where because even if he, we see how much he cares about her, but him just kind of doing this on his own, right? It seems like it seems to be for the good of the war, for the good of Rhaenyra and her conquests and everything to take back the Seven Kingdoms, but like kind of like they mentioned, right? He didn't even send out any ravens when he took Harrenhal. He's not responding to the ravens that are sent to him, right? So it's kind of just he's kind of just in his own little corner of the world, just trying to figure out what to do. And I think that the conflicts that he's been presented with are not really. We see how his inner conflict is, I guess, halting his involvement in the main storyline, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Indeed, and we're going to see how that plays out in the next couple of episodes. Now, what I call is basically this is just we have one more scene before we get what I call is the back and forth of council meetings, where we go from Rhaenyra's council meeting, who are angry at her because she's trying to end the war, to Aegon's council meetings, who are just willingly withholding information from him. So either way, we see that things are not going well for both rulers, honestly, on either side. They're both surrounded by council members who are both either actively undermining them or basically telling them, yeah, you ain't shit, so we're going to rule things the way that we want, to their face. So needless to say, it's understandable why they take the actions that they do in this episode. But first, Rhaenys, like I said, they're setting her up as like playing. Like I said, this is her episode, a pretty important episode. So they're making sure they're giving her a lot of moments. Her going to meet Corlys, and of course she runs into Alan, and it's beyond clear that not only is Alan Corlys's bastard, but also the fact that Rhaenys knows about it, which I think is again it's an interesting twist. I like how they're not even trying to do the Laenor, the fact that Alan could possibly be Laenor's bastard, because that just doesn't make sense, frankly, from an age standpoint. So, right. What are your thoughts on Rhaenys recognizing Alan and telling Corlys, oh, he should be made legitimate, and Corlys is like, not the time right now?
I think it's pretty in character for her, honestly. She's never been one to really kind of drag about kind of personal slights against her. And even if it is like, her own husband kind of having a child out of wedlock and everything like that. I mean, she knows her place, right? She kind of, at this point, she knows like the relationship that Corlys and her have is, strong, right? Compared to every other couple we see in between this and Game of Thrones. It seems like they have probably the steadiest ship, pun intended, in terms of their bonds with each other. So I think, and plus, I mean, in this the kind of era that they're set in, bastards like
it's gonna happen,
popped out willy-nilly, right?
Especially with the higher lords as well, specifically.
Sure.
So I think it's interesting, especially since I'm wondering after the events of this episode ends if that plays a part in Corlys legitimizing Alan and Adam ultimately, because the two of them, especially once Adam claims sea smoke during the sowing of the seeds, Adam will be what's it called? They're gonna need that Valyrian name ultimately. So now, like I said, so which one of the So there's another scene before we get to the back and forth of council meetings. Allison talking with Grand Maester Orwyle, asking his thought process on if he thinks that Viserys screwed up, making Aegon king, to which Orwyle does not give a response. So Allison, you can clearly tell, Allison is really, really suffering the thoughts of her decision making here. She is just like, wow, Rhaenyra kind of confirms what we all already knew. Aegon should not have been king. This was not a good choice. And now we're buckled in and locked in because war is our only choice. And man, like, I mean, we know
I really liked seeing her process, the conversation that happened in last week's episode with Rhaenyra, where, like I said, it's context we never got in the book, that Allison like had the realization like later on that like, oh, maybe Aegon wasn't actually meant to be king, and now all this has happened. So it's a really interesting perspective to put onto the green side of things, where someone actually knows like everything that like it was the way it was supposed to be,
right?
And now, but we see how it's not really affected her decision making. She's kind of still doubling down, and we see with her conversation with Aegon, which I'm sure we'll touch on in a little bit. But I mean, there's no plan to deviate, but the guilt is still there. right? And I think
Yep.
it's leading to her being a little colder with everyone around her, and especially now with Kristen Cole gone, it feels like she's a bit isolated from the from the council and everyone else.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So now we have the big event that kicks off the back and forth of the councils. Kristen Cole has begun, and Gwen Hightower, they've begun their campaign in the Crownlands in order to take castles. First, they take Duskendale, which is the home of Lord of House Darkland, who are loyal to Rhaenyra. He kills Lord Darkland himself, and that prompts the back and forth of the council meeting. So, like I said, Aegon is angry that Sir Cole is not trying to make way, head to Harrenhal, while Aemon, but he has an interesting moment where Aemon finally gets his revenge from last episode when Aegon humiliated him at the whorehouse. He checks him by speaking in High Valyrian, which he knows Aegon can't speak very well, as is
Right.
evidence right afterwards. Meanwhile, on Dragonstone, the Blacks and their reaction to that is basically, where the fuck is Rhaenyra? Which honestly, kind of fair, because even though Rhaenyra is off on her own mission in a last-ditch attempt in order to try and save the council, this is the next big council meeting that Rhaenyra was absent from. And the next big council meeting where some important decisions that needed her input needed to be made. So the Blacks council meeting is kind of where I want to start before I go back to Aegon's. You have
Absolutely.
Rhaenys kind of like attempting to wage caution. Sir Alfred Broom is once again just raising nonstop problems and violations. Corlys arrives in order to try and make peace and kind of remind everyone where their loyalties lie. Then Rhaenyra shows up and gets chewed up by Jace, her own son of all people, who's basically like, yeah, you're supposed to be leading us. Where the fuck were you? So what did you think of that whole sequence with the Blacks Council?
I kind of like it that they're, obviously they have a lot at stake, right? Because they're kind of going against the current occupiers of the throne, right? So I completely understand the different perspectives that are being thrown out. And I mean, that's what every good council should do, right? Like if they're not offering up like hard counters to everything you're doing, then are they really doing their jobs?
Right.
And but no, it does seem like Rhaenyra, between mourning, the death of Lucerys and kind of her little side quest to see Alicent, which, while important to her as her, her individual character arc, yeah, is kind of leaving some much needed or some unneeded, I should say, gaps in terms of leadership. Which obviously we see Corlys step in like for a little bit. We see that he has the respect of the council when Rhaenyra is away. But yeah, I think. There are arguments to be made for both sides, and that's what I think is really and this applies to the Greens and the Blacks. The complexity between all the issues, I think, is obviously the writers do such a great job of of showing all the different sides to everything. But
Indeed. Stand-up moment for me in this sequence is Jaceres, who I feel like has kind of been on the back burner for these first couple episodes. We saw him at the beginning, making contact with Cregan Stark and Winterfell, and I like that connection that they built. But we immediately see him fly home, and he's kind of in this period of mourning over these next couple of episodes. Not getting much to do. And here he's kind of being touted as leader. He is Rhaenyra's heir, ultimately her firstborn, and the heir to the Iron Throne after her. So it's
Right.
nice to actually see him start to take some leadership roles, especially given the important role that he's going to play in the sowing of the seeds over the next couple of
Yeah.
episodes. So that's going to be interesting to see, and I'm really liking to see how that started here. Especially given that he's another character that unfortunately meets a tragic end a little too early. Moving on to the green side, Aegon, man. Oh man, like at this point, it's pretty much like the illusion is officially up. The jig is officially up after the rat catchers, Blood and Cheese robbing him of his heir. His brilliant idea to have Cole send Sir Eric to Dragonstone and how that went. And now, after he was about to lead his forces with Kristen Cole and then chickened out at the last minute, nobody is taking this guy seriously anymore. Literally, Aemon may as well be running those council meetings ultimately at the end of the day,
He
When he's like,
basically was, right?
Kristen Cole staying in the Crownlands. He's not going to Harrenhal like I thought. What's going on? And Aemon is kind of being like, yeah, we have to do this. We have to destabilize Rhaenyra's supporters, in order to kind of draw them out, and then Aegon, he's just like, he leaves the council meeting saying, you guys bore me ultimately, which we know is just him lashing out. It's real that he feels like he's being undermined and not taken seriously. And he goes to see Alicent, and Alicent is basically like, yeah, we fucked up making you king, and because, and you had the chance. So it's like, we made our decision, we made our bed, we sleep in it, but you have had the chance to listen to men wiser than you, who have been ruling longer than you, who have more experience than you, and who would be able to work our way out of the situation. And you even said actively only helped to make things worse. And Aegon is like, well, what should I do? And Alicent's like, nothing, because there's literally nothing you can do other than sit back, shut up, know your place. And yeah, he finally takes something to heart. Took him long enough, but he finally takes something to heart. As far as the results of that, well, that's not so good. But
I
but
think with each passing episode, I feel like Aegon really is kind of more of a tragic character than anything. And definitely we're kind of seeing just his need to, he wants to feel important and do right by the people, right? We see that scene where like earlier in the season where he wants to replace the farmer's sheep, right? But there are all these logistical problems, right? That Otto brings up, that you simply can't do that for everyone. And when you do start doing it for some, then others are going to come knocking. And yeah, I it's really funny how like this entire war is basically centered around him, and but he's basically being kind of shoved out by his own brother and his own council.
Right. Exactly.
And it's just he's kind of just a puppet, right? Little figurehead, so to make
Dancing
everyone else, have everyone else fall in line.
Yeah. What did you think of Alicent and finally the talking to that giving to Aegon the talk to that he unfortunately really needed? And then that scene with Lara Strong afterwards, where Lara Strong is kind of like, yeah, you've been absent from the council. Is everything all right? And Alicent's like, I fucked up with my son. Viserys had aims for peace, and they have been completely destroyed by everyone around him. So at the end of the day, trying to maintain Viserys' message and ideas, that's kind of out the window now. So and she's kind of like lamenting that like the peace is finally over.
Right. And it makes you wonder if she had that conversation with Rhaenyra earlier on, could all of this have been prevented?
Right.
Because if Alicent had taken Rhaenyra's side, right, upon Viserys' death, then it
whole bunch of moments too that could have helped beforehand. All the shit with Laenor that prompted that on. Rhaenyra's initial jealousy and anger at Alicent for a decision that was ultimately not her own when Alicent was wed to Viserys in the first place. So many things that could have been done differently up until this point.
It's tragic. It really is tragic.
This is a tragic tale, to say the least. So, Eli, we've been building it up. We've been hyping it up all episode. It's the centerpiece of the episode. The Battle of Rook's Rest. The first major open battle of the Dance of Dragons. So, like I said, we have our setup. Criston Cole, Gwaine Hightower, their forces are nestled outside the castle. They're preparing to attack. The Blacks are like, they send aid to, they request aid from Dragonstone. Jace volunteers to go. Rhaenyra refuses, saying she does not want to lose another child after Lucerys. Rhaenys volunteers to go instead. Rhaenyra makes a surprising move and confides in Jace the story of Ice and Fire. Rhaenys shows up to Rook's Rest, starts providing cover with Meleys. I love the build up to this scene too, because it's a scene that, the Targaryens and their bonds with their dragons are some of the cornerstones of this series. And so before such a pivotal, important battle sequence, to see both Rhaenys and then Aegon bonding with their dragons as they ultimately make their decision, Meleys and Sunfire, before they fly off. And especially what's revealed later on in the battle, when we see that obviously the whole thing has been a trap in order to lure one of Rhaenyra's riders out, so that Aemon riding Vhagar, hiding in the forest, can come out and deal with them. But there's unfortunately an unexpected element of the plan, which is Aegon's, insecurity finally gets the better of him, and he rides Sunfire into battle. And even though in the book it was set up that this was like a planned out thing that Aegon and Aemon were both supposed to ride out, clearly that was not it, because they clearly did not want Aegon there. And as Aemon calls him an idiot under his breath, and then Aemon does one even worse, where not only does he let Aegon get brutally injured and taken out, because unfortunately, like, watching Sunfire fight Meleys, it's almost embarrassing in hindsight, because Sunfire is so much smaller than Meleys and so much more inexperienced as a dragon fighter. It's not even close. Like at least in the book, they made it seem like it was a little bit of a matchup, but it was almost like Vhagar and Aemon were letting them tire her out before they attacked and ultimately take her out. But here it's like, nah. It was almost
personally, I like that, because it kind of symbolizes the weakness of Aegon's, character as a whole, in terms of his influence over people, and his impulsiveness, kind of just throwing himself into the battle so he can feel important and everything. And we just kind of see in typical Aegon fashion almost at this point that he's just so grossly underprepared for everything.
Yes.
And
literally. And in this case, his first dragon fight, and oh man, does he get burned. Like Sunfire's barely. It's so funny because in the books, the battle is so fierce and it's all 3 dragons get involved at one point that, when Sunfire goes and Maylis go down, you almost don't know like who injured who. But now it's so clear that like Vhagar just flies in after the fact and it takes out Sunfire immediately, immediately, like to the point where it's like, oh man, and like Sunfire doesn't even look that much bigger than Vermax. Is the thing, and Vermax is not a big dragon. Like, oh man, just think about how much worse it would have been if Vermax and Jace were there. They wouldn't have lasted 5 seconds. But at the very least, it's Maylis. Maylis is even though it's Maylis is the sad thing is once again the problem is once Vhagar gets involved, there's really no chance of beating Vhagar. But Maylis is at least a bigger dragon. It's a more battle hardened dragon. Maylis has been around a little bit, caused some damage, and once Sunfire and Aegon are out of the picture, once it's just Maylis and Aemond. I mean, first of all, I will say this: Maylis and Vhagar's fight, it was a lot longer than I thought it would last. I will say that. I thought Vhagar was going to take Maylis out instantly, but Maylis manages to throw in a couple of jabs as well.
Yeah.
Gets a couple
I think
good
also
looks
in character for her. Definitely not going to go down without a fight, or at least getting
exactly.
a few punches in of her own.
And that's ultimately why I love like the setup of Rhaenys when she's introduced like in this episode when she first sees Alan and Alan is immediately like, my lady. She's like princess, like she's officially kind of owned her title, and Rhaenys has showed that like she is not one to back away from a fight at all. Like it's shown in the book and in the show that she has a chance multiple times to get away, but instead chooses not to. And she even has that moment where after Sunfire gets taken out, she has a chance to escape and get away, and instead chooses to continue fighting and go with it. I love that tearful moment where she like, you can see the connection with her and her dragon. Right. And it's like, they are just so in sync. And I absolutely love that versus Aegon and Sunfire, who it almost looks like that's the first time that Aegon's ridden Sunfire. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. It probably is. And Aemond and Vhagar, they're a little bit more, in sync. But as we saw, also Vhagar doesn't always listen to everything Aemond says, as we saw in the season 1 finale. So it's so tragic how it goes. Because Maylis is injured too, and they're searching for Vhagar on the ground, but Vhagar gets off the ground too quickly, and they're about to fly over the castle, and then Vhagar just comes in. You see the jaw snap over the neck. Yep. Vhagar's signature move, and it's like once that happens, it's like Maylis, they're done. They're done, and oh man, it's quicker than I thought it would. It plays out a little bit more like Hardhome than it does like oh my god, what's the loot train attack in Spoils of War in season 7, which I thought it was going to be closer to, where even though time lengthwise it matches that battle in terms of it being about the last 20 to 30 minutes of the episode, the actual dragon fighting itself is relatively short. But we knew that was going to be the case. So
yeah.
What did you think of just that specific section of Maylis versus Vhagar?
Oh, I mean, I just love how Vhagar is just like, in just a tier of its own, right? Like, everyone obviously, they get scared when they see dragons, but just when Vhagar finally gets into the battle, we kind of just see everyone freeze, and it's just like really sets the scene. Just like Vhagar really is just unstoppable almost, and I feel like she had to have known just going into it, she probably wasn't gonna win, and
she knew that when she took off from Dragonstone, when she's talking, she's almost like one last fight, girl. Like she has a very, very solid chance that like, I feel like a lot of the Targaryens are going to have a lot, the older ones, I should say, are going to have a chance that like, they're more than likely not coming out alive. I feel like the only one that's insane enough to believe, I'm going to come out alive of every battle is Daemon, at least until the very end. So,
right.
The other thing too, also, as far as matters of significance, is that Daemon at Harrenhal seeing a vision of himself with an eye patch on, alluding to his future fight with Aemond. So I thought that was pretty cool. But then my favorite moment when, after the fight, right? So obviously there's a moment where Vhagar, when it's fighting with Maylis, lands. And there's a great moment where you just see Vhagar trampling over all the other soldiers, which is just comedic gold. Like I said, this fight was a lot funnier than I thought it was. And it knocks Kristen Cole clean out.
Oh,
and he gets up. And I love it when he comes over and Aemond is standing over like the husk of Sunfire, who is so badly burned and ripped up, barely like, and you just see Aegon just like lying there pristinely, and it's almost like Aemond is like ready to take him out fully. And I don't know if he holds back if Kristen Cole doesn't make it there. So I just thought that moment was hilarious.
Wonder, yeah, I mean, obviously it's no secret that Aemond and Aegon have had quite a bit of animosity towards each other, and I feel like just every scene in the last couple episodes between them has done a great job of building up that kind of resentment. And I mean, it's understandable from Aemon's perspective. He's the one kind of really running the show in terms of the battle tactics and everything, communicating with Kristen Cole, You know, he's kind of
Right.
showing up his brother in the council meetings. He's showing every possible way that he would be the better ruler, you know, and then Aegon is just kind of there, just like, well, I'm the king, I can do better, and you know, it makes you wonder how much of their that kind of brotherly competition between each other played a role in Aegon's decision to jump into battle like he did, you know.
Yeah. Oh,
And
it
it makes
100%
you
played
wonder
a
if
part.
that's what Aemon wanted to begin with, right?
It could, but I don't think that Aemon was planning. Aemon was planning on humiliating Aegon no matter what. It was just a matter of at that point he figured, okay, Aegon's just gonna sit at home, drink himself to death while I once again get shit done and make myself look better and a more competent ruler. He definitely wasn't expecting Aegon to actually, but just based on the exchange between those two, he definitely was not expecting Aegon to show up to the battle, but he definitely used it to his advantage. And once he saw him, he's like, okay, let this idiot, I'm like, I can work this to my advantage. Let this idiot tire her out. And also potentially get himself killed, which again, I'm only benefiting from that if I'm Aemon in that scenario, and then let me swoop in for the kill, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and plus, just like when Vhagar is going after Rhaenys and Aegon fighting in midair, he doesn't even try to like kind of hold back. Like if he hits Aegon, oh no!
If he hits Aegon, oh no, it's the end of the world. But it's like, look, I didn't plan on this idiot being here, you know, and you're just in my way at the end of the day, you know. Sunfire again, he's so small compared to Vhagar. Like, oh my god, like Sunfire's really not that much bigger than Arax compared to Vhagar. Like Vhagar really is just in a league of. I think the only other dragon currently, because I don't know if we're gonna see the cannibal at all, or if the cannibal is gonna be mentioned. The cannibal we know is the only other dragon on there that's like as old as Balerion, if not older than Vhagar. So it's older than Vhagar. But Vhagar, besides being the oldest dragon and the largest dragon, I think the only other dragon size-wise that comes close to Vhagar is Vermithor, who we saw at the end of season 1. Jaehaerys' old dragon. So, and we're going to see Vermithor later on in the season. But yeah, just like none of the other dragons could match Vhagar weight-wise. I mean, Meleys is one of the few that comes close, but still, I mean, once its neck is in Vhagar's jaws, that's it. Game over, man.
Yep.
And unfortunately, like I said, we see the look on Rhaenys' face as they fall and crash into the castle and they take it out. So, really good episode, really good fight sequence. You know, really good manner of progression of the story. Just the nature of the battle, how it comes along, the fact that it was this trap set. You know, Criston Cole and Aemon, they are a match not to be trifled with, to say the least. So, with that being said, Eli, what would you give episode 4, A Dance of Dragons?
Oh, I think I gotta give this one a 5, just because of all the fan service we got. I think the actual battle itself was executed so well between what was happening on the ground, what was happening in the air, and just the overall build up to everything. Kind of just seeing the stress, you know, I don't know how to put it, but the stress points on both sides being tightened even further. I'm not sure what kind of analogy that was, but
no, it makes sense. It makes sense.
No, it was great. My favorite episode this season thus far. I think each one's been better than the last. I'm excited to see the fallout and see how characters react to everything that happened. Right, we had huge losses on both sides. They really did not hold back from showing the horrors of war in this world, and I think it was absolutely fantastic.
Indeed it does. Indeed it does. Yes, I'm going to give this episode a 4.5, just about. It's not my favorite episode of the season. I still like last week's episode a little more in terms of how well that really set the stage, but in terms of delivering on what Rook's Rest was from the novel, incorporating those new elements, really setting up and once again saying that it is these characters and their choices that are motivating everything that is happening here. Again, another fantastic episode. Cannot wait to see the fallout from this, especially since this is essentially what directly leads to the sowing of the seeds, which I've been hinting at and talking about every single episode. So yeah, really had a good time with this. So with that being said, people, that is it. That is our next episode recap of House of the Dragon. Like I said, we are trucking along with these. We only got 4 more of these. We only got 2 more weeks of the boys. So make sure you guys tune in with me and Eli on Thursday. That's going to be an absolute blast. Eli, thank you once again for joining me. Where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
If you want to follow me on the interwebs, as Dom puts it, you can find me at E_Holicky45 on Instagram. And hopefully the plan is to get a YouTube channel going at some point. But
at some point, if I don't get you live streaming about soccer on this channel first, you guys can follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms, at Official Talking TV Podcast across all platforms. Subscribe to us if you're watching us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitch. This episode will be available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts tomorrow morning. And as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies, and in this case, TV. We'll see you guys next week for episode 5 of the House of the Dragon recap.
I was following King Viserys' death.
My brother was a slave to his omens and portents. Anything to make his feckless reign appear to have purpose.
What are we going to do about it?
Did you really think that you could just fly about the realm, trying to steal my brother's throne?